What happens when the very person who is supposed to guard the law becomes the one breaking it? What happens when the symbol of justice, the judge in the black robe, the voice of authority in the courtroom, is caught violating the very principles she swore to protect?
Welcome to the case file. Here, every crime has a story, every mystery leaves a trail, and every detail could be the difference between truth and deception. From assassinations that shook the nation to manhunts that gripped entire cities, we uncover the raw, unfiltered events behind the headlines. These are not just stories. They are lives, choices, and consequences. The files are open, the cases are real, and the truth is waiting to be found. This is the case file. And don't forget to like, share, and subscribe.
She was elected in 2012 to the Cleveland Municipal Court, a position of enormous responsibility. Judges are meant to be the bedrock of the justice system, ensuring fairness, upholding integrity, and preserving the public's trust in the law. Carr quickly made a name for herself as outspoken, bold, and tough. She wasn't timid, she wasn't quiet, and she wasn't afraid to speak her mind. In fact, her style won her admiration from some who saw her as fearless. But toughness without restraint can turn into cruelty. Outspokenness without discipline can spiral into chaos. And inside Judge Carr's courtroom, her reputation for being bold and tough soon became something darker. Something that would ultimately destroy her career. It all came to a head during the year 2020. The world was shutting down. A deadly pandemic swept across the globe. Businesses shuttered, schools closed, and courts across Ohio suspended operations to protect public health. But while her colleagues adjusted, postponing hearings and adapting to safety protocols, Judge Pinky Carr decided she would do things her own way. While the official orders were clear, Carr ignored them. Instead of closing her courtroom like others, she kept holding hearings, often in secret. Lawyers weren't notified. Defendants were never told. Yet cases were called. And when people inevitably failed to appear for hearings they didn't even know existed, Judge Carr issued arrest warrants. Think about the injustice of that for a moment. Ordinary citizens, many already struggling during a global crisis, suddenly facing arrest not because they broke the law, but because they never received notice of their hearings. These weren't just clerical mistakes. These were deliberate choices by a judge who thought she could make her own rules. And that was only the beginning. As investigators dug deeper, the truth about Judge Carr's courtroom was far worse than anyone imagined. Over 100 separate acts of misconduct were uncovered. Inside her courtroom, the atmosphere was anything but professional. Carr joked about sending people to jail, not as punishment fitting a crime, but as part of a Friday tradition. To her, incarceration became a punchline. She mocked attorneys, belittled defendants, and handed down sentences that had no legal foundation whatsoever. She created an environment where no one could predict whether they would receive justice or humiliation. The courtroom, a place that should be governed by fairness and dignity, became a stage where Carr played the lead role in her own twisted performance. And people noticed. Complaints mounted. The Ohio Supreme Court eventually intervened, demanding answers. And it was then, during the investigation, that Carr's defense stunned the entire nation. Her lawyer stood before the court and argued that this was not misconduct at all. It wasn't corruption. It wasn't intentional abuse of power. Instead, he blamed menopause. Yes, menopause. Hot flashes. Mood swings. Emotional instability. He claimed these biological changes explained her behavior on the bench. At one point, in a statement that left many observers speechless, he said, "How does sleep apnea or menopause contribute to lying?" Well, it affects her mood. It affects her ability to think clearly. In other words, Judge Carr's defense was that her body, not her judgment, caused her to abuse her authority over and over again. But could that explanation really account for over 100 acts of misconduct? Could hot flashes and emotional stress justify wrongful arrests, unlawful hearings, and the humiliation of defendants? Carr herself eventually stepped forward. She apologized. She said she never meant to cause harm. She spoke of stress, of health struggles, of personal problems weighing heavily on her shoulders. But apologies could not undo what had already been done. The damage was real. The trust had been shattered. The Ohio Supreme Court weighed everything: her years of service, her defense, her apology, her misconduct. In the end, their conclusion was clear. No excuse, medical or otherwise, could erase the fact that she had abused her power. Judges are held to the highest standards precisely because their authority affects lives, families, and communities. When a judge betrays that responsibility, the very foundation of justice trembles. And so, in 2022, the ruling came down. Judge Pinky Carr was hit with the harshest penalty short of permanent disbarment. She was indefinitely suspended from practicing law. Her career, once filled with promise and prestige, collapsed in disgrace. The woman who had once stood as a representative of justice became a cautionary tale of how easily power can be corrupted, and how strange the defenses can be when that power is challenged. Her menopause defense will forever be remembered as one of the most bizarre excuses ever raised in a courtroom scandal. But beyond the strangeness, beyond the headlines and the jokes, lies a deeper truth. This was not just about one judge. This was about the fragility of trust in our institutions. It was about how easily fairness can be twisted when accountability is lost. For the citizens of Cleveland, it was betrayal. For the wider legal community, it was a warning. And for all of us, it is a chilling reminder. Justice must never depend on personal moods, medical conditions, or excuses. It must depend on the law, on fairness, on integrity. So we are left with the haunting question. What do we do when the guardians of justice themselves become the threat? The name Pinky Carr became a headline, but behind the headlines were real people, defendants, attorneys, families, whose lives were touched by her decisions. Some spent nights in jail when they shouldn't have. Some were mocked in front of their peers. Others were left confused, wondering how the very system designed to protect them had turned into a trap. For attorneys practicing in her courtroom, the atmosphere was unpredictable. Lawyers never knew if their clients would be treated fairly, or if they themselves would be the target of ridicule. Justice, which should be consistent and impartial, was replaced by mood swings and spur-of-the-moment decrees. Imagine walking into a courtroom not knowing whether the law or the judge's personal frustrations would determine the outcome. That was the reality under Judge Carr. The pandemic only magnified the problem. While the world was adjusting to new rules, Carr created her own. Secret hearings. Surprise warrants. People accused of crimes who had no opportunity to defend themselves. And every time someone asked why this was happening, the excuses grew thinner. When the investigation finally peeled back the curtain, the picture was clear. Over 100 acts of misconduct. Not one mistake. Not two. More than 100. That number is staggering because each act was not just a violation of procedure, it was a violation of trust. And every violation chipped away at the foundation of fairness that citizens expect in a court of law. The courtroom is supposed to be a sanctuary of justice. For centuries, it has been seen as the one place where the poor and the powerless could stand equal with the wealthy and the strong. But in Carr's courtroom it was different. Defendants didn't just face charges. They faced humiliation. They faced unpredictability. They faced a judge who sometimes treated the bench like her personal stage. The irony is that Judge Carr once promised to serve with honor and integrity. Those were her words when she took the oath of office. To serve the public. To uphold the law. To act without bias. And yet, as the years passed, those promises faded into something unrecognizable. When her case reached the Ohio Supreme Court, the defense strategy shocked nearly everyone who followed the proceedings. Menopause. Mood swings. Hot flashes. Sleep apnea. These were the explanations offered for behavior that shattered the confidence of an entire community. The argument was unusual, even unprecedented. Legal experts shook their heads. Critics asked, could biological changes really excuse deliberate choices? Could stress explain away the decision to jail people unfairly? Could hot flashes justify 100 violations? The court didn't think so. Still, Carr's defenders insisted she was not a monster. They painted her as a woman overwhelmed by health problems, personal struggles, and the weight of her responsibilities. They argued that she was human, flawed, and in pain. But here's the truth. Every judge is human. Every judge faces stress, exhaustion, and personal challenges. And yet the vast majority uphold their duty with fairness and dignity. What set Carr apart was not her humanity, but her refusal to respect the limits of her power. When Carr herself spoke, she was remorseful. She apologized. She admitted she had lost control, that she had allowed her struggles to affect her work. She begged for understanding. But apologies, however sincere, cannot erase the consequences. The Ohio Supreme Court had to weigh two things: mercy and accountability. On one hand, they had a woman with a career of public service, now claiming illness and regret. On the other hand, they had undeniable proof of systemic misconduct, a broken courtroom, and citizens left scarred by unfair treatment. Their decision was firm. Carr would not be removed from the legal profession entirely, but she would face the harshest punishment short of disbarment. Indefinite suspension. No courtroom. No robe. No gavel. Her authority stripped away. For Judge Pinky Carr, it was the end. For the public, it was a warning. Because this story is not just about one judge. It's about what happens when power goes unchecked. It's about the danger of allowing excuses to replace accountability. And it's about the fragility of trust in our institutions. If a judge, someone trained in the law, someone elected by the people, someone sworn to fairness, could abuse her role this openly, what does it say about the system? If excuses like menopause can be raised as defenses for blatant misconduct, what does it say about responsibility? The case of Pinky Carr forces us to ask hard questions. How many other acts of misconduct go unnoticed because no one investigates? How many defendants have suffered in silence, too powerless to challenge the system? And what does justice mean if it depends not on the law, but on the mood of the person behind the bench? For some, the scandal was entertainment, an outrageous story to shake their heads at. For others, it was a personal wound. And for the legal community, it was a reminder that integrity must be defended every single day. And so, Judge Carr's name will forever be remembered not for fairness, but for failure. Her menopause defense, bizarre as it sounds, will be studied in law schools, discussed in legal ethics classes, and whispered about in courtrooms for years to come. A symbol of how low the standards of justice can fall when accountability is lost. But there is one lesson above all others. The law must be bigger than any one person. Judges may rise, judges may fall, but justice must remain. And when it falters, when it bends under the weight of arrogance or excuses, the people suffer. The case of Judge Pinky Carr is shocking. It is bizarre. But more than anything, it is a warning. A warning that justice is fragile. A warning that power can corrupt. And a warning that excuses, no matter how unusual, can never erase responsibility. And so we end where we began, with a question. What happens when a judge, the guardian of the law, breaks it over 100 times? What happens when she blames it all on menopause? The answer is here in the fall of Judge Pinky Carr. The robe stripped away, the gavel silenced, and the courtroom doors closed forever. Because in the end, justice cannot be excused. It must be served. The story of Judge Pinky Carr is not just the fall of one woman. It is a story about accountability, about power, and about the dangerous consequences when those sworn to uphold justice turn against it. Her courtroom may now be closed, her robe forever taken away, but the lessons remain. Because justice at its core is fragile. And it requires constant vigilance to protect. Don't forget to like this video, share it with others, and subscribe to the channel for more stories that uncover the truth behind the headlines. And I'd love to hear what you think. Do you believe Judge Carr's explanation was fair, or was it simply an excuse for misconduct? Share your thoughts in the comment section below. Your voice matters, and your perspective could spark the kind of discussion that keeps justice alive. Because together, by asking hard questions and demanding accountability, we can make sure stories like this are never forgotten.